Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, listeners. Here we are again, another Saturday morning with Stephen, and he's proudly wearing his all black shirt, so we'll find out what the story is behind that shortly. And a lovely bit of news. Stephen is talking to us from somewhere very special. So firstly, Steve, welcome again, Saturday morning. We'll get to the rugby situation later, but let everybody know how special it is for you this week.
Thanks, Chris. Well, good morning, or actually it's good afternoon from me. It's good afternoon from Malaysia. Selamat tengah hari, as they say here. Yes, I managed to catch a flight on Tuesday, having received permission to enter Malaysia from the Malaysian government, which I'll be eternally grateful to the Malaysian government, and the cabinet, and the task force for issuing their approval for me to enter and be reunited with my family. So I flew on Tuesday. It was quite an experience in some regards, and not much different in others. But we can get onto that later. But no, thanks. Very pleased to be here. I am after 102 days separated from my wife and my son. I think it was on day 99 that I got the flight booked. So and day 101 when I flew. So very happy to be here. Proud as punch, as they might say.
Yes, good man. No, I'm really pleased with you, Steve. Well done. Now, a lot happening this week. And again, even though there's been a few blips all around the world, and people are starting to talk now about a second wave, and I've heard some people even say we're going through a very lucky period because it's death's vacation because of the summer season and people getting things working again. But firstly, while you've got the shirt on, let's talk about the Australian situation.
Well, for those that know me, and I knew you, Chris, Australia is a country that's very close to me, closer geographically now than it was when we spoke last weekend. But actually, I've lived and worked in Australia for a number of years, and I think what's happening in Australia is pretty severe in terms of its the impact of the virus. Actually, not from a health stand. I think Australia and New Zealand were two of the countries that we were sort of championing or heralding as doing actually quite well. They locked down early, they restricted movement pretty soon. But the effects of that are now pretty devastating. So we've seen, we saw Virgin Australia obviously go into administration just as the crisis was kicking off, and now come out of administration with the sale confirmed yesterday, the purchase by Bain Capital of Virgin Australia to a new group of investors. But during that time, we've also seen, Qantas essentially, and all carriers in Australia ground their airlines completely without much flying at all. In contrast, I think, to other countries who we've still seen certainly some element of domestic or regional travel. So with the exception of some of the regional, PSO type flights, or Australia sort of rural air service routes, there's been no flying at all, and that of course has hit the airline industry massively. So we've seen Qantas announce this week 6,000 redundancies. I suspect that as part of Bain's acquisition, we're seeing some news from there that this will result in quite a large number of redundancies in the as Bain worked to develop the new model, or is it being called VA Mark II?
Yeah.
And I feel now that the Australian government has essentially locked down Australia, locked its borders down until 2021.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And I just don't know that that's actually the right move. I think, is this a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, or is there something else at play here? Because the economic impact of that, not only to the airlines that we're seeing, is very desperate. Qantas announcing they won't do any international flying until next year. Alan Joyce was quoted as saying yesterday on the ABC 7:30 news, which I get back here in Malaysia, of course, now every day. Unlike in the UK, we struggle to watch the news channels. But it's highly likely that there won't be any international flying from Qantas for the next 12 to 18 months. And that just shocks me, because Australia has been known for a country that's been open, very liberal to tourists, to foreign workers, to to opportunities, the land of providing people with opportunities, the land of the give everyone a go, sort of give everyone a go, give everyone a shot. The tall poppy syndrome is not as well in evidence in sort of Australia that these tall poppies are cut down. This is a country that has supported equal opportunities for a very long time, and that openness has kind of all but gone in the Morrison government's choosing to close down the border. So that's why I'm wearing the shirt. I'm flying the flag for Australia today, and I'm just surprised at some of these decisions that are coming out. Some of these countries that were originally heralded as doing the right thing, and now I think what they're doing is quite retrograde.
Or Steve, from the other side, they've seen how effective they were with doing something early, and they're also taking a more global view on what's happening everywhere else, and they don't want to get involved in it. So there's two very different sides of the coin, depending how you look at
Chris, it. I guess end of the line. No, Australia, it's not a country people transit through. Generally, exactly. You're going there. It's your destination. So maybe it's the right thing to do. I mean, I can't see that they haven't even sort of discussed what we're now seeing come out of the UK and coming out in the news. I think to be announced next week, are these risk approach or risk-based air bridges.
Yeah, the traffic lights.
Traffic light system. So Australia will only maintain an air bridge with New Zealand. Yeah, and that's because they've got fairly tight connections already anyway, into sort of ingrained in life with ANZA, and freedom of movement between the two already. So maybe there is something in it, Chris, but they haven't even sort of entertained or discussed a traffic light based approach, which I find is unusual. And this will harm industry for many years to come.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the problems that we've got at the moment. You've got the political argument and the financial argument, and the scientific and the financial, and it's getting mixed up. And I think the next few months are going to see who's the wiser, but it's going to be very, very, very difficult because it always looks, or it definitely looks like at the moment, when you look around at some of the areas, there will be a second wave. And if people don't learn and do things differently than the way they did them the first time, the second waves of things like that normally tend to be a little bit worse than the first one if lessons haven't been learned. So I don't know, maybe they're doing a tough thing at the beginning, but in the long term, it might be one of the best things that's done.
Possibly. I guess we won't know until it's over. So who knows when that will be. And
it's a tug of war between two generations at the moment.
I agree. I know. We're in slightly different generational, with a slight generational gap between us, Chris. But
it's very politely put, Steve. Very politely put. Yeah.
but you're right. I mean, the frustration that some feel about having their wings clipped, metaphorically and literally, versus those that are now allowed to fly free and roam again. They don't want to. They're still. And of course, people are questioning. So the education system, we've seen that the teachers are questioning whether it's safe to return their students to school, and they're deciding that it's not safe. Well, actually, are they the ones to decide that it's not safe? Why is it that a teacher can unilaterally decide that she or he won't open his class to those students that so desperately need education?
Yeah.
I'm yet to fathom that out, because everybody now seems to be an expert in everything. Here we are discussing the merits of it all, but certainly not proclaiming to be an expert in anything. Simply offering some opinion and thought generation. But I'm amazed that sort of some people, when given the opportunity to get back into some way of normality or some normal life, have chosen to stay locked up, as it were.
Yeah, no, I understand, Steve, and it's going to be something that's going to be debated and talked about for who knows how long. But until this vaccine comes up, there's going to be an awful lot of toing and froing. And obviously, a big date which you're not going to be here for on the 4th of July is when they start opening the pubs and everything here on a Saturday night.
Of course, that's typical.
So that's another pearl. Yeah, but another pearl of wisdom. Another pearl of wisdom from a government that they would do so on a Saturday night instead of a slower start, maybe on a Tuesday or something.
I would have been there. I would have been there had I had the chance.
Yeah,
I'd rather be here, of course.
Yeah, no, I know.
You knew I would be there.
I knew you'd be there, mate. But anyhow, getting back to the good news. So Bain, and obviously they've got a clear plan. You know, they're going to stick to the same fleet now. So, and they're going to downsize, and everything's going to be streamlined, which is something that every airline's going to do. So the unfortunate short-term future is there's going to be a huge amount of right-sizing, downsizing, whatever you want to call it, with a huge fallout of redundancies. Now, with that in mind, it's actions, tough actions that have to be done. So obviously people are going to have to try and deal with that as best as they can. But some other news, obviously, this week with Swissport. So that hit the headlines. So that's amazing. So have you got any thoughts on that one?
Sorry, Chris, what support?
Swissport.
Sorry, I missed that again.
Sorry, my friend. The Swissport handling.
Swissport, sorry. I thought you said something support. I'm not sure. You know, to call it, you know, from Surrey to Malaysia is a bit further than it was from Surrey to the
clearly,
to London.
yeah.
Swissport, look, I mean, Swissport are, I mean, we saw, was it a week ago we discussed, or 2 weeks ago we discussed Swissport Belgium, and some changes there. Obviously, some, you know, major resource changes going in across the globe. You know, I think, you know, it's not a Swissport issue per se, but of course, Swissport are mostly exposed to the changes in the Virgin Australia business, because that was formerly the Aerocare business in Australia. Before it was sold to Swissport. I think that was maybe 18 months or 2 years ago now. You know, and I think there's almost a sort of a semi degree of exclusivity across that. I think Swissport are probably exposed to majority of Virgin's ports. You know, so I suspect that that'll be tough for them. But you know, the JobKeeper scheme in Australia, much like other systems in place elsewhere, you know, will run out at some stage, and the support available for these businesses to continue, you know, having staff on the books or payroll that are not, you know, call them sort of, you know, effective or, you know, required for the lower volumes going forward will be a problem. And I think there's going to be a lot of fallout from that. So, you know, without Virgin having gone, you know, through this process and sold, I think, you know, that market as a whole would have changed specific, you know, generally anyway.
Yeah.
You know, of course, we've. I think it's a continuation of what we're seeing everywhere else. So as sad as it is, I suspect this will continue for some time, Chris, as airlines, you know, have had the chance now to sort of, you know, regroup or re-strategize or rethink their models going forward. I suspect those models going forward will be very different to the past, whether that's you know, streamlined or, you know, reduced set of products or reduced network, or, you know, a lot of talk about ground handlers now, you know, only taking on contracts that are profitable. So they won't enter into loss leaders because they think it'll win them some work elsewhere, which is very common in our industry, which of course then, you know, it caused a little bit of the challenges associated with multiple station contracts, etc. But you know, if you look at each contract on its own, it's now going to stack up. That will be a problem for airlines going forward. So therefore, when you look at marginal routes, actually it's the same for airlines. Airlines that may have maintained a service or maintained a connection, Chris, to preserve, you know, their brand or competition, whatever. They will say, actually, you know, bugger this. We're not going to, you know, unless it's providing a reasonable return and a positive return on capital, we're out of here. So I think we'll see more of that, and therefore the effect on the services sector, you know, which is, you know, ground handlers and the like, cleaners and fuelers, interplane providers, cargo terminal operators, etc. That will be another big hit.
It will, but I think it's long overcome, and we've been talking about, you know, legacy waste and legacy inefficiencies.
Yes.
So all in all, I think it's going to be good moving forward, because the way things were going, it just didn't make sense at all. And I think now,
no, that's right.
Now that the clouds and storms of change are you know, hanging over everybody, when it all clears up, it will be a much easier to understand and easier to respect in some ways industry, and it's something that's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
100%. Now, another little point, you've got Ryanair, okay, obviously making their feelings well thought of with regards to the Dutch government and a bailout for KLM. So this bailout issue now, and when a government should and who they should and why and everything, I think that's something that's also showing a huge amount of inconsistency, especially in the European Union.
Well, you're absolutely right, Chris. And I think we may have touched on this sort of early on when this sort of first crisis first eventuated. I think there's a difference between a government providing commercial support, financial support on a commercial basis, essentially as the lender of last resort to a viable business that was viable before the crisis and will be viable after the crisis. What we've got is a liquidity crisis.
Yep.
So in that liquidity crisis, the airlines, in this case KLM, has reached out to its government for support, and I think that is in my view, I think that's a very viable and legitimate ask of a business. What I believe is not or should not be the case is decisions by government to fund on a commercial basis or otherwise, but essentially to prop up ailing businesses. So businesses that were potentially unviable before the crisis. Let's take Alitalia, for example, that favourite Italian carrier of ours that seems to have been in perpetual bankruptcy for 20 plus years.
Seems a good strategy.
It's a great strategy. Seems to work. Yeah, no problem here. So pizza, pasta, vino bianco, jobs are good on. But in seriousness, those are businesses, Chris, that I think are demonstrate where there would be some validity of the challenge that Ryanair is making, or the point that Ryanair is making, because to continually throw good cash after bad, seems an illogical business decision of anyone. I know governments are not in the habit of making smart decisions for the most part, but I think sort of primary school finance or economics would probably tell you a business that's been bankrupt for 20-something years is probably not worth throwing a single cent at, let alone multi-million euros of taxpayers' cash. It's not government's money; it's the taxpayers' money. So I think to Ryanair's point on KLM, I don't know what the ins and outs are. Nobody probably ever does with O'Leary, but obviously there's an agenda. But I can't think that KLM, that has been a successful organisation, been a profitable airline, that actually, for many, many years has been the standout performer within the Air France KLM group. Yeah. I don't think there's a reason that would not legitimise their request to their government for aid on a commercial basis.
I agree. Yeah, and I think Mr. O'Leary's point that he makes it in his own sweet way, and fair play to him, where he's talking about the subsidy and what it means for every Dutch man, woman and child. And basically they could have had an option of either a subsidy, which is slowing up reforms, or that every man, woman and child could have had 5 flights with Ryanair instead. And, it puts things in perspective. And I sympathise with him on this one. I think it's, I agree with you. I think if something's not working, you've got to change it, reform it, improve it. Don't just throw more money at it, when it hasn't been doing what it should have been done in the first place.
I'm not sure that is the case with KLM, because I know Peter Elvers, and he's an excellent chap, and I think he runs an excellent business at KLM. And of course, Ryanair will be using it for their own sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, to justify their existence. And Ryanair is, I've said this many times, both professionally and personally to friends and others, Ryanair is the standout airline when I think about efficiency, discipline, consistency. They exemplify all of the traits of a good airline. So Ryanair should not be arbitrarily penalised by a decision for a state to provide a commercial loan. But I don't think KLM is in the same basket as Alitalia. That's for sure. Also,
no, that's clear. That's clear.
These other basket cases that would not be entitled to taxpayers' money. And I think KLM operates a very different model to that of Ryanair. I suspect that getting to Curaçao or the Dutch Antilles will be quite difficult on Ryanair because they don't operate to those markets. So on that point, I suspect that we'll probably disagree with Michael Neely, but on the very rare occasions, I would.
Well, there you go. That's one for the books. Now, another favourite, and an airline that's been mentioned several times, Wizz Air. And now that they're
Chris, so you've got it sponsored by Wizz Air.
Exactly. No, I'm only joking. There is no sponsorship. But also now the fact that they're increasing flights now out of Larnaca.
Mm-hmm.
So there's good news popping up, in many places, and that's nice. So
I think it's great.
I mean, services.
We saw some green shoots a couple of weeks ago, that we spoke to, when summer schedules were sort of re-released, if you like, or remarketed by carriers. I think what's going to really help. So I mean, great to see Cyprus, but Cyprus was an early front runner there. I think Wizz Air were basing some aircraft there as well, which obviously is a massive investment that they're making to base aircraft in Larnaca. So that hats off to the Cypriots and Wizz Air for moving early. I think there's something to be said for having the front foot on this, being on the front foot rather. And we knew that Wizz Air actually sort of continued throughout this process, or throughout this crisis, in maintaining some level of service. But their messaging and the way they've communicated has been excellent. I think furthermore, Chris, what will help is we saw the UK government. I wouldn't say announced, because I think it's due to be announced on Monday. But yesterday, Friday, I think, didn't we see some news that the UK government went into the traffic light system, which again will help the carriers.
The corridors, yeah.
So I think that will help massively and get some confidence back in the market. Get some travel options opened up for people without this arbitrary 14-day quarantine. For those in the green zone. I don't think we know quite how it's going to work yet fully, but I suspect that if you're green, you're good to come in without quarantine. If you're red, you're probably quarantined. I suspect that's how it is. But
a little bit of logic at last, because some of the things that were going on didn't make sense.
Yes,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
Instead of people saying, what a terrible thing, the government's making U-turns, etc., I think it's a good thing that if somebody realises they didn't make sense, that they actually do something that does make sense.
Absolutely.
But I think something that will cause a little bit of concern, and definitely a lot of focus and attention, is when they announced it and they're talking about Portugal not being included, and they've covered like France, Italy, Spain, Greece, Belgium, Germany, Norway, Netherlands, Turkey and Finland, but not Portugal. And the reason they gave for Portugal possibly not being included is because of the recent number of new cases and spike in and around Lisbon. So I think as countries start to see certain things occurring, if they don't get it under control, it's going to have a wider effect, and people will take actions a lot quicker.
It does create a bit of wanton desire for these countries to want to be on that list. When you look at these countries, Brits are pretty good tourists for the most part, barmy army and some others excluded. For those listeners that are not familiar, it's English football hooligans generally cause general chaos. But I think English or British tourists are welcome for the most part, Chris. I think also they're pretty good spenders in these resorts, and a lot of these villages and resorts, and they rely on particular segments of tourists. So there are those outlets and towns or resorts that cater for German tourists. There are those that cater for British. There are those that cater for the Scandies, etc. And so there'll be a lot of pressure, I suspect, within those countries, particularly in Portugal, on the British Algarve, as it's well known, for from tourism bodies to put a lot of pressure on their government to get them back on that list, I suspect.
Yeah, but it'll be a lot will be focused on now, how they track and trace and how they isolate and understand what the root cause of these spikes were, and then learn from it. So that's something that's going to take a lot.
Well, the other thing I don't know if you saw in the news yesterday that 50% of the imported cases into the UK were from Pakistan. And
Pakistan is very topical at the moment.
Hot news.
That hot news. Now, whether it's as terrible as it appears, but this business over fake licenses with pilots is absolutely it's just unacceptable. So I think also countries that have certain question marks over the formality and the disciplines of certain key areas, this is also going to come to light as well, and it's going to affect the communications and relationships with other countries.
Absolutely. I think this. I mean, I'm amazed. I think was it yesterday? I mean, PIA had tweeted, just simply tweeted that pilots with shoddy licenses won't be tolerated. So it was clearly something that was well known about, Chris. It was well known and probably well in evidence that this had been an ongoing problem for some time. And I think I read yesterday, take it with a pinch of salt, I'm not sure the facts are fully there yet, but I'd read sort of, anecdotally or that they believed there was up to a third of PIA's pilots were holding shoddy licenses or fake licenses.
fake licenses or had cheated in exams.
Yes, and they hadn't presented themselves at the exams. Yes.
Yeah. And I think
incredible.
I always, like when I used to do audits and stuff, I used to always look at what I call the 4F principle, which was, favour, flexibility, familiarity, and fear. And wherever any of those 4 areas were prevalent, there was always then abuse or misuse or whatever it was, and you have to be so careful.
Yeah. Well, that's the same.
Things happen everywhere, but if it's more, if it's more culturally influenced, then it's something that needs to be looked at very, very, very carefully.
Absolutely, and those 4Fs apply in every walk of life, Chris. I mean, we see that a lot of the stuff that we do in safety and security, and those are very, very good guiding principles.
No, it's a big old shock. Now, I mentioned earlier, Steve, and not to have any more doom and gloom because we got enough of that, but the realities are that there probably will be a second wave. As to where and as to how bad, but there probably will be a second wave. So taking the positives, all of the things that have been learnt now by so many, we've been speaking about airports doing things, in the same way, carriers doing things in the same way, so people and consumers can get their confidence back. I think it's going to be very, very important that as this press coverage now is showing different spikes and different people congregating on the beaches, and then, like you said, that can't go to school the next week, it's ridiculous, and it's a huge paradox from every single perspective. But I think what's necessary now is people are going to have to define the exact guidelines and the exact timings and happenings as soon as triggers are evident as to what will happen if a second wave starts to come and how they're going to manage it. Because I think if they do it quick enough and they do it formally enough, an awful lot of businesses will still be able to carry on in a certain way because of the mitigating actions that they take, rather than, a guillotine coming down on everybody. What's your feeling on that?
Well, look, I think we are. I mean, we said from the beginning, Chris, that this, and the analogy I used was the hammer and claw, the hammer coming down and clawing back up. I think we will see that. I mean, I think that's inevitable. I mean, there is some suggestion that the contrary to what you're suggesting is the second waves, which I don't doubt, by the way, but there's some suggestion that the strength of the virus, is weakening. So it's losing its sort of grip on the human race, and therefore I don't know that maybe the effects will be quite as severe, or maybe there'll be a different kind of, these things often mutate into something different. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm a glass half full kind of guy, so I'm looking for the positives, as you say. I think also we've got into some new habits. We've become more accustomed to being slightly more conscious of our personal space. We've become slightly more aware of conducting oneself slightly differently. We become more aware of the risk. The risk increases as you put larger numbers of people into a smaller space. So I think people are responding well and have responded generally well. Of course, there are the idiots that congregate in the beaches, and the hundreds of thousands that we saw in Bournemouth the other day. Brighton, by comparison, was a very socially distanced beach. So 2 beaches in south coast of England, two very different photographs. One social distance and one not. So I wonder what's to be said about the crowd that go to Brighton versus those that go to Bournemouth. A lot of people could answer that, I suspect. There's a lot of views about both those beaches, but I'm not going to do that here. So, Chris, I think we're seeing in our business people changing their behaviours. We're seeing airlines operate differently. I mean, when I was on my flight, the crew were dressed up. I thought we were going to the moon. They were in full hazmat suits, which I thought was completely overkill. But their airlines obviously taken a decision that they would. That's the right thing for them to do. And then on the other flight I took, there was no meal service because the airline was taking the opportunity to be tight-ass buggers and remove all their catering. So the one airline that the crew was operating normally, the crew had no protection, served no food. But the airline that I was on the second flight, they served all the normal meal and drink options as you would normally get, but with the crew in hazmats. So there's you talk about paradox. There's already a paradox between airlines themselves internally. So anyway, these are little nuances, little fun things that will. I mean, they're fun, but they're humorous to us. But they are serious measures. I think people will start to become a little more used to these things because I mean I don't know that responding in the same way again with a full lockdown will do us any favors economically.
I agree. That's why
socially,
if the triggers indicate when and why and how, and everybody's got mitigation, then hopefully it won't have the same
effect. We continue as
normal.
We should continue. I mean, I live in Asia. Here I am in Asia, where malaria and dengue kill more people every year than coronavirus has. But people still come here on holiday. They still come here and they visit these beautiful countries. I live in Malaysia, but there's beautiful countries. They still visit sub-Saharan Africa, where dengue and malaria are hugely prevalent. I've had dengue myself. Let me tell you, I was in the hospital. It's not a pleasant experience with drips coming out you and all sorts. So I think we need to put this in perspective. And so look, actually, we will have learned a hell of a lot epidemiologically through this. That's quite a mouthful.
I was going to say, you did very well there, son.
I think we'll have learned a hell of a lot epidemiologically through this.
Oh, you love it. Hey, I like it so much, I'll say it twice.
That will allow the scientists and people far smarter than you and I having our weekly catch-up to decipher the right control measures. And what we did last time, or what other countries did last time, doesn't mean that's right again. So I think we'll see some modification of that going forward. But I hope certainly that our industry, starts to recover, and if there is a little spike again, that we don't have this sort of knee-jerk response and bring the hammer down again and close everything up. That, in my view, would be devastating.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's why I'm saying that they should know what the triggers are, and then when those triggers appear, they should have a clear list of what you should be doing to mitigate, and then they keep control of it rather than go crazy. But it needs everybody to understand and appreciate that, we've gone a long way into this, and like you said, things are beginning to look normal. And I was going to ask you, how was it on the boarding process and also on the check-in process?
So both airlines, which I won't name here, it's not very fair. But both airlines were pretty good at both parts. I mean, the check-in or the bag drop. I mean, I checked in online for both flights. I think that's what people are recommending. That would have been a logical thing to do before coronavirus. I don't know why people still go to counters to check in personally. But that was fine. There was, if I tell you the terminal at Heathrow, then you'll know which airline it was. But there was nobody there anyway, so there was nobody there for me to worry about, to be honest with you. The boarding process was done back to front on both flights and both airlines. So they did the same thing. So they boarded in much smaller numbers. They didn't even allow those with loyalty status or premium customers to board different. They were very and they did that pretty disciplined. What I would say is I have seen evidence this week to suggest that that's not a smart move, because whilst it might limit the number of people moving to the cabin, it does from what I've read, it does create some elements of additional risk exposure. And actually, randomised boarding seems to be the right thing to do. I'm not sure that I'm going to look up on that this week and do a little more research. Maybe we can touch on that next week, because I suspect there's a lot of airlines looking for the right way forward now, in terms of their boarding process and how they manage that. But I did see. I think it was something that was published this week by Simply Flying. Give Shashank and his team a shout out. They do a great job at Simply Flying on a lot of this stuff. But I'll look that up. But look, the process was once you're in the cabin, apart from wearing a mask, which people complied with. They didn't have to be told. They wore their mask, and when they were eating, they removed their mask. I mean, it's quite a straightforward process. I mean, it's not all that difficult for the human race to follow a simple instruction, which in North America it would appear that it's quite challenging for Americans to follow the rules. I'm not quite sure why that is, but there seems to be a dislike of their freedoms being impinged by wearing a mask. Of course, that puts a massive challenge back to the cabin crew and the ground staff there and trying to get these people off the airplanes.
Exactly.
Very, very difficult. Just wear the bloody mask, you idiot, and let everybody else get on with it.
Yeah. Very, very, very politically correctly put there, Stephen, as always. Beautiful. Absolutely good.
Just because I've changed my shirt and changed my location, Chris, doesn't mean that I'll change my.
No. Yeah. No. I know how much of a good supporter you are of the All Blacks. Right now, listen, we had a few questions. Again, and we got one from Stephen, not yourself. It's spelt differently, and I know how you like to have your name spelt correctly. But we've covered it. So basically, a gentleman called Stephen was talking about the second wave appears imminent. What economical triggers need fast track to allow second and different lockdowns? So we've covered that. What elements of business guidelines will help businesses during the next set of restrictions? So I think I agree with you. If people are a lot more sensible, a lot better prepared, and as you said, they don't have to do what was done before because everything needs to be modified. But I do think that degree of positive communication, not fear-mongering, but positive communication of making everybody prepared will allow a lot better uptake of certain guidelines and rules. So that's there. Now, Martin, how can safety and security be maintained with such disruption and delay in training and oversight? And this is cropping up in a lot of places now. And some of the contacts I've had, the number of incidences on the reboot have actually gone up. And human factors we know well, but now there's a big impact now of whether that's also to do with pressures and anxieties and slight modifications of procedural guidelines. So what do you think on that, Steve?
I think, well, yeah, very, very relevant, Chris, and I saw some of your correspondence on that. Previously, I think we touched on what's required for the restart in terms of policing the restart, and it will have to be policed properly. When I say police, I don't mean slapping tickets on things. I mean through good, evidencing that people are trained, evidencing that qualifications are still valid. If they are not valid, have they been extended through a proper process, and when will they regain currency or recency again? And evidence that the safety management systems that would have already been in place in a business have been adapted to deal with this kind of restart. Because I suspect that there are some pretty good SMS practitioners out there, and there's some pretty good businesses that have very good integrated SMS throughout their organization. Certainly, as airlines, it's bread and butter. It's what they do. Less so as you go through the services chain, without being disparaging, but I think that's fair to admit that there are some challenges in some of the service providers because they don't have the same certification or licensing requirements as airlines would do. But look, I think what has to be done, Chris, is management have got to be held to account, and the person at the top of the tree that's responsible for the restart, or the accountable manager, or nominated post holder, nominated person, has to with conviction, ensure that there are accountable people for each and every task, and that means going through with a fine tooth comb everybody's recency and certification, and simulations even if required. Actually, when was the last time you pushed back an aircraft? Well, it might have been 4 months before you last pushed back an aircraft. Do we have to do full training? And what is the training? What if you've been away for 4 months? I suspect a lot of those training requirements don't even exist in our business, Chris, because they've never had to be put into practice.
Exactly.
In the airline business, however, a lot of them already do, because when pilots have not had X number of landings in a 3-month period, or they've not, they're out of recency or currency, or there are very well versed procedures that are in place. So I think it would be potentially helpful that airlines take some of the lead here to ensure that their contracted service providers are doing the right thing. And it means it's also about the staff taking accountability for their own actions, Chris. And so, to Martin's point, if you don't feel comfortable that you have the experience, or you haven't done this recently enough, then it's incumbent on you as the operator to put your hand up and say, no, I'm not doing that. There's equally as much responsibility on the individual as there is onus on the firm. Yeah. So I would say a couple of bits of advice: make sure that people are held to account. Make sure that the boss boss's feet are nailed to the floor on this, and make sure that you've got a culture in the organisation that is one of just culture for sure. That if you can't do something, you don't feel confident doing something, that you can put your hand up and say no. I think with that in mind, and with the help of your training teams and training departments and auditors, this is not about auditing. Actually, auditors need to put a different hat on here. This is about trying to foresee and support the business rather than slap a ticket on something.
Exactly. They need to coach, train, help. And like you said, you need a hand-in-glove just culture whereby the management and the employees understand that it's a shared responsibility. One's responsible, one's accountable. And
correct.
So, good, sound. Now, another one from Jenny. How will pricing be addressed fairly for critical suppliers rather than capacity demand-driven price inflation? Ethics. Now, this I think this came as a result. We had a very interesting podcast during the week with Willam, who's the chief officer cargo at Qatar, and he was talking about having to come to a decision whereby, from an ethical perspective, he was seeing how the pricing was running away. That was market driven for charters, etc. But for PPE, they felt that they shouldn't be charging such a high rate, so they divided and they had a differential between the commodities, which, it's a sound principle, but it's also something that people need to be aware of. So, how would you answer that one?
Well, look, we live in a world that is a consumer led world where we expect commodity pricing, and that equally applies to airline services, whether it be paying for your freight costs or paying for your handling costs. What certainly helps pricing is competition. The worry, I suspect, is that they are gone out of business or into administration or whatever. The worry, I suspect, is that without competition, you're unable to extract good prices from the market. So going down from 4 or 5 providers down to a single source provider is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So that will be an impact. So I'd like to think that businesses will act responsibly. But I can't help also but think, Chris, that our pricing, if you look at pricing in the ground services sector, it has typically been for the airline to pay as little for the service as possible, and for them to skimp and scrape when it comes to ensuring that the ground handler gets a reasonable margin, screwed into the ground after lots of very tough negotiations. So I suspect that we've spoken about this before, that there needs to be a bit more equilibrium, there needs to be a bit more balance. Yeah. And when I've heard some of the big ground handling providers, their CEOs have said that they will not enter into new contracts that are below cost. They will only maintain profitable contracts, and that they might even set a bar, whether it's a 5% margin or 10% margin or 11% margin or whatever. But there might be a bar set, and that contract doesn't fall into that basket, they're not interested. So the pressure, therefore, on the airline as ground handlers rebuild their price base or the cost, the pricing models, is that, of course, the consumer ultimately will be paying more for their service. Yeah. So whilst there may be a degree of morality when it comes to, or immorality when it comes to gouging and opportunistic pricing, there will have to be a reset when it comes to consumers thinking that they can get, at the end, touch a button, their e-commerce system to send them a pair of trainers in the post, and that the freight on that doesn't go from being free or inclusive to actually having to pay for a service.
Yeah, even the e-commerce principle now, I think, also needs to be readjusted. And something that happened to me during the week, was online with someone, and I just heard a noise, and I looked out, and I seen these packages being thrown over my gate. So when I came offline, I went to have a look, found out, got in touch with them, and they said, "Oh no, there's been a clear signature," and it was my first name, not the name that I go on. So somebody, whether it's outsourced or crowdsourcing or whatever, they just, that's it. Nobody came to the door.
And they signed it Joseph.
Yeah, signed it Joseph, exactly. And there's somebody on the phone.
It was me.
Yeah, who I was. Yeah. But things need to change all around. Now, last question from Mohammed. And this is very relevant, beautiful timing. And it says, would you both fly next week, next month, or would you wait until next year? So clearly,
I would fly last week.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly, Mohammed's thinking of going on vacation, and fair play to you, Mohammed. But I think all of us, if there's something that we can do, we should do. But it's also important that everybody that offers the services has some sort of consistency and transparent information and communication that makes us all feel that little bit safer.
Yes,
so
agreed.
Having to be the person that I've known to be the last one to fly, on a grade of 1 to 5, how confident were you?
5.
Okay, I should probably ask somebody else, because you're always like that. So you're always a 5. Can
I tell you also that my wife and I have booked another flight in a couple of weeks' time for some domestic travel in Malaysia. So I've got no issue with flying, and I don't think. But again, personal experience. So everybody will do their own thing, but we will fly, and I will not stop flying, and I will get back to doing what I love.
Yeah. And that's also a little bit, I'm just thinking, I hope to God I'm around in another 30 years, just to see how possibly there might be a little change, because like I said earlier on, it's now going to be this tug of war between generations. And that confidence and that, that frontier man approach, I wonder if that'll
Chris,
be.
You do yourself an injustice. It's actually 22 years and not 30. So.
Is that what it is? You've already worked that one out, have you?
I have.
Yeah. No, but seriously, fair play. Yeah, and everybody, we all have to try and do what we can to get the wheels rolling again. Now, normally we finish with a domestic tip of the week. Do you have one this week?
I don't. Here I am in my study back in Malaysia, which is a long time since I've been here, but domestically it's looking rather, well, I've got a busy few days ahead to get it back into the shape which I left it.
Oh dear! I'm pretty sure Ramani won't be listening to this one, because if she is, there's your domestic tip. Careful what you say about what your wife has been doing whilst you've been away. So there it is. Steve, listen, mate, have a lovely week. I'm so pleased you're back with the family.
Thank you, Chris.
Look forward to seeing you next week. All right, take care. God bless.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Have a good week. Bye-bye.